everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Oh, the lights have just gone off in the room I'm in.
It's got a bit dark. What happened?
I'll have to do this slightly in the dark. Thank you everyone for joining us today and giving up your time for this session. And today we'll be talking about our new edition of our English Matters series with Julia Sander, the author of English Matters. This is the last webinar in our series that we've been running this week called Language Lab. On Tuesday, we talked about Snappy Sounds, our pre-primary phonics series. Yesterday, we talked about Language Tree. And today, we're finishing off by talking about our secondary series, English Matters, second edition, which is the latest edition and published late last year. So it's brand new. And Julia, the author, is here today to talk to you about that. If you missed any of the sessions this week, the Snappy Sound session or the Language Tree session, the recording and the slides will be sent to you in an email within the next 24 hours if you've joined us today. So don't worry if you've missed those. And they'll also be available on our social media channels. I can see lots of people using the chat box, which is great. Good morning, everyone. Keep using the chat box throughout the session. Ask any questions you've got. Get involved where you can. Yeah, that would be amazing. And I'm seeing lots of hellos from all over, which is great. The session today will run for an hour, and afterwards you'll be sent the recording, the slides, and a certificate. So do check your inboxes, and that will be shared with you in the next 24 hours. And without further ado, I will pass on to Julia, and I will turn the lights back on in this room. Thank you, Julia, and enjoy the session, everyone.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for attending. It's just after midday here, so my day is well on the way, but I gather it's very early morning for you. And we're delighted with your interest in English Matters. The series has been around for about 12 years now, so we decided it was really time to refresh it, and it's had a bit of a makeover. I noticed that we have quite a few attendees from Jamaica. Jamaica is ahead of the game because we produced the revised Jamaica-specific edition a couple of years ago, which you may have seen. It's very similar to the edition we're talking about this morning. Now, this edition is known as the Pan-Carib edition because it's produced for all the territories, particularly those doing OECS. But it'll be very relevant to Jamaica because the new features that we put in this version of English Matters are reflected in the Jamaican version. If you are in Jamaica, I would recommend you use the Jamaican edition rather than this one. This one is called English Matters, and the Jamaican one is called English Matters for Jamaica. So it's fairly straightforward to see which is which. Now, the way we're going to run the session this morning is that I'm going to give a brief overview of the new edition, talk a little bit about the new features. Then I'm going to look at how the book is structured, so you have an idea of what we were thinking of when it was planned and the best way of working your way through it to get the best advantage for you and your students. And then we're going to have a much closer look at the new features then and see what they add. And finally, we'll look at 3 important skills development, one being language, the other being comprehension, and finally writing. I do welcome questions, but please put them in the chat box. I will look at them and hope there's something I can talk about at the end of each section. I'll pause and deal with the questions, so please keep them coming in. Right, so let's go on to the first slide here, and this tells us what new features we have in the second edition of English Matters. There are a lot of new reading texts to reflect contemporary issues, things that are on students' minds and on our minds at the moment. Very important amongst those are texts about the environment, using social media, and healthy living. Now, we haven't got rid of our wonderful Caribbean focus. The books have an entire focus on the Caribbean, and still include writings by eminent Caribbean authors, as is reflected by the photos you can see on the right-hand side of this this slide. It's very important for Caribbean students to become aware of their own literary heritage. On request from teachers, we have included more boy-friendly texts. There's always been a complaint that there's not enough to appeal to boys, so we've made a point of adding more things about sci-fi, about computers, all sorts of things to interest the boys. One of the main features of this new text, we'll go on to this now, is to engage the students much more closely in the learning process. So they're aware of what they're doing, why they're doing it, and taking responsibility for their own learning. So you'll see that for each unit in the books, we've set clear objectives at the beginning for the students. And then right throughout the book, there are self-assessment, reflection features, writing in journals to encourage students to become independent learners. Another important feature which we brought in is a focus on research and project work, because since the first edition, CSEC has introduced the school-based assessment at CSEC level, and teachers start preparing for this. From my work with teachers, I've heard that many schools actually start writing the language arts project in the year 10, which is straight after this series. This series goes for grade 7, 8, and 9. So it's important preparation work. And in line with the new age, we have a greater integration with technology, use of computers, so that students can do some blended learning. And you'll find that right throughout the series. And we've also provided links to CCSLC. If you are covering this syllabus, you will find it comes in the form of a note at the bottom of the page where one of the exercises links up to something students are required to produce if they're doing CCSLC. Right, now we're going to look at the overall structure of the book. And here we have, every book begins with a table of contents. And we divide the book into 3 themes. This is grade 1. So the first theme is quite close to the student, about personal identity, how they'll feel about coming to a new school, what they do in their free time, and so on. The second theme is communication, which is very much about all sorts of language and communication through technology, advertising. And then in the third theme opens up a little bit. It's called The World Around Us. And you'll see we've got themes like modern world, let's go green, science. And each theme has 6 separate units, followed by a review, which is just a review of students' progress. It's got exercises in all the skills, so that you can assess that your students' progress and see what needs revising. And at the end of the book, we've got quite a comprehensive reference section, which starts with a guide for students to refer to. We start with parts of speech, punctuation, a sentence structure, and then we have a composition review, which we'll look at later, followed by a grammar guide, a glossary, and finally, transcripts of listening exercises. We've always had listening exercises in English Matters, and as in the previous series, these have been recorded with local speakers, and you can find them. You can find the imprint in the back of the book, and they are available online for you to download and use with your students. Right, moving on, we'll just have a quick look at the contents of Students Book 2, Students Book 3, and that reflects the needs of the different age groups. Student Book 2 starts with My World. Then we have a focus on narratives, all sorts of narratives, including cinema, which is a form of narrative. And the final theme is issues, about healthy living, play safe, social media, advice, and so on. And Students Book 3 moves to a theme of growing up, your expectations, your identity, rights and responsibilities, peer pressures. And then moving on to different types of writing, and finally looking outwards to shaping my future. And the final section here covers important skills such as study skills, using technology, protect the planet, healthy lifestyles, and finally looking at careers and starting work. Right, now next slide, I'm going to take you on to look at one of the new units in the book. We have replaced some of the older units with a contemporary theme, and this one is called Let's Go Green. Obviously, it's about the environment, and it forms part of the theme, The World Around Us. And the first thing you'll see on the left-hand side is a little orange lozenge in which we have the student objectives. And we'll look in more detail a bit later at these, but that's from the start. Students know what the expectation is in the unit. And then we have the top left, we have a listening exercise, which is a radio discussion. I just flick on to the next slide, which shows the text for that. The text is at the back of the student book, and the text of this one is a discussion, student discussion, actually a radio interview with two students who have set up an eco club at their school, and they're talking about what they're doing and their concerns about the climate and all these very important issues. I'll go back to the speaking and listening page. Every unit starts with a listening and speaking page to open up the theme and to introduce the ideas and to start students thinking using the relevant vocabulary. So after a listening exercise where they've got to make notes on what they hear, they then have a speaking task, which begins with a group discussion and has an output. Students have to work in groups to create a set of guidelines for their class on how to live more sustainably. And you will see a couple of the new features here. We'll come back to those in more detail, the student journal and the reflection. I'm not going to give a detailed part of the presentation on listening and speaking, but what I will say is that for each of the speaking and listening tasks, there is an output. And I think that that's very important when you're teaching speaking, developing speaking, that the students have a clear idea of what they're supposed to produce. Right, moving on now to comprehension. We have two comprehension tasks in most units, and they will be contrasting texts. That we're starting with a newspaper article. There's a second text which we won't see this morning in this unit, which is a web page. And we always start with some pre-reading questions to get students thinking about the text. And then we have a newspaper article about the environmental activist Greta Thunberg. This carries on to another page. And we have the full article going on to the next page, and then this is followed by comprehension questions. That is one area we'll look at later, comprehension questions, how they're set, how students can answer them, identify different question types. And we have a follow-up activity here, which integrates technology. This is the technology's sign, and students are encouraged to think about role models, taking Greta Thunberg as a role model, and then looking at other role models. And in the table, we've given the example of Rosa Parks. They're asked to think of two role models from real life and two from fiction, and to make a chart showing the role models, the name, the sources in real life or fiction, followed by the characteristics and actions. And they will then use we look online to conduct their research. Right, now moving on, remember that there's another web page, there's another comprehension source before reaching the language section, and that is a web page on deforestation, and the skill practice there is writing a summary. Now let's move on to the all-important language page. I'm going to come back to this because it's an area which I think we all struggle with to get our students to write accurately. But there's a double spread in most units on language. And in this case, we've got past tenses. We're looking at the simple past, as opposed to the present perfect, and then moving on to the past perfect. And then these are the final 2 pages of the unit. We have a page which is called Words Matter. Language matters is about grammar and punctuation. Words matter is based, obviously, as the name says, on words. It can be spellings, it can be syllables, like synonyms, antonyms, homophones. This is the areas we're looking at here. Here we're looking at tricky words like its, ITS, or its, IT apostrophe S, which I've very frequently seen misused everywhere around. It's not just students who get it wrong. And then we're looking at the various forms of there, and then to, or to. And you'll notice the feature on this page is a tip. We have a tip box on several pages where students just give a little bit of advice. So for its, it says try saying the sentences using the words it is. If it makes sense, the spelling is its with an apostrophe. The final page on the right is the writing page, and in this unit is a group project. And the project is to plan an eco activity which will benefit your school. We provided a few ideas. It could be tree planting, it could be a cleanup day, a recycling project, a book or clothes swap, or students are free to choose their own ideas. And notice how this is based on everything that's come in the unit. It's all been on setting up an eco club, how to protect the environment, and students have discussed it in their speaking and listening exercise, and they've had lots of information in the 2 reading sources. So they're well prepared for this. And we give them a planning web, and within their group, they have to prepare a project plan. The technology task is to type up a professional looking project plan. And then the final writing task is to write the text of a speech to be delivered to a school assembly about the Eco Club. And reflection exercise asks the students to think about how well they worked as a group and how they might work differently next time they work on a group project. I think it's very important with English Matters to go through the book and go through the units in the order in which they are written, because all the skills, all the vocabulary, all that the students learn, it's all closely linked to bring them to the point where they can write the activity, they can undertake the writing task at the end of the unit. It's probably best not to pick out particular features from different parts of the book and work on those. You can do that by using the workbook, and we'll come on to that a bit later when I have a section on using the workbook. Right, at the bottom of the page, you'll notice that we have a link to CCSLC. There's a green arrow showing that, and the skills required on this page are listed. The skill required here is working groups to plan a project, which is included in CCSLC Module 3, and prepare publicity materials and write the text of a speech. So if you're doing CCSLC, you can look for these links and use them to help you work on CCSLC. It's very hard to say that one. Right, I'm going to move on now to focusing on the new features. I haven't seen any questions in the chat yet. Any quick questions before we move on? Everyone happy? Looks okay then, we'll move on. Right, we're going to look in more detail at the new features that are provided in this series. And the first, as I've already mentioned, are the objectives, which are included at the beginning of every unit to orient the students and to show them what's expected. And the first one on the left is from Student Book 1. And in this unit, you will summarize interviews about books. They're going to listen to some interviews about books, identify different types of books and state your reading preferences. That's the speaking task. Read and summarize a short story and a poem. That's the comprehension task. The language task is to review the use of quotation marks. The word task is to interpret commonly used proverbs. And finally, with the writing task, they create a reading log and write a book review. I've got a question. I think that is from Rhea Baptiste. It's just a question. Can a country request to have a text specific to their country? We have a text specific to Jamaica because Jamaica has quite a large population. It depends on the size of the country. In the edition we're looking at, we have made an effort as far as possible to include all countries with a text reference to them. But we are actually following a syllabus which will lead to the CSEC exam in language arts. So country-specific editions might we have. I think you might need to ask the publisher about that. That's not anything I can answer myself. So save that one. Right. So let's go on with the objectives. We have book 2. The objectives are listening to an interview, noting details, presenting yourself using a me map, completing a personality test, studying a poem and a fictional extract, review the parts of speech and a simple present tense, use a dictionary to extend your vocabulary, write autobiographical paragraphs, and set personal goals for the future. And in the book 3, finally, they're asked to comment on views expressed in a vox pop on learning styles. Prepare and deliver a speech on learning strategies. You can see here the emphasis on developing good learning techniques in the student. Answer questions about time management and prepare a to-do list. Examine, I think we could all learn something from this. Examine texts from a study guide and apply recommended techniques to your reading. Review the use of capital letters and use brackets and the dash correctly. Use transition words to summarize and show emphasis. Design questions and conduct a survey, and write a collaborative report. Right, we're now looking at the student journal, and you will find in every unit there are at least 1 or 2 examples of this little feature, suggestions as to how the students could use their journal. And again, this is to encourage students to be reflective and to be responsible for their own learning. A few examples here. Collect words and phrases which appeal to you from the poems you read. Copy some of your favorite poems. Prepare a list of common errors. Use it to proofread your work. Note interesting words and phrases from the description in your journal. Keep a reading log. Enter the names of the book you read and their authors. Record your impressions of each book. Write a set of guidelines for young people on how they should use computers and social media. And finally, create a section on persuasive techniques. Write a definition of this technique. State reasons why it's effective. Source 2 or more examples of this technique found in advertising material. And of course, these can be linked to technology as well. If you're doing blended learning, these are things that students can work on independently and come back with the results of their research. And as I said, you'll find at least one in every unit, and probably 2 or even more in some cases. Right. I need to go down. Hang on. Let's see, 36. There we have. Right. Right, the next new feature is the one that is called reflection. And this is something that will be done after completing a task. I'm not going to read all of these, but I'll pick out the most important ones. This is students reflect on the learning process and the activities they've done. So the first one is, how do you learn best? This is about learning styles. Reading about a topic, listening to a presentation, seeing diagrams and graphs, practical activities. The next one along the top is about research. Which sources did you consult for your report? Which were the most helpful? Which other sources could you consult? And then again along the top, what are the benefits of sharing your work with a partner? How can you help this partner improve his or her writing? This is about peer evaluation. I'll go down to the bottom now about story writing. How did the story plan, students were expected to write a story plan, and then how did the story plan help you write your story? What might happen if you try to write a story without planning in advance? And then finally, if reflecting on group work, how well did you work as a group? How could you improve next time you work together? I think I've discovered the trick here. Yeah, I found that it allows, so there we are. As well as reflection, another important feature of the books is the emphasis on self-assessment. And at the end of each theme, there will be a review section, as we mentioned. And the first page of the review section is a self-assessment for the students. And we ask them to work in pairs, discussing what they practiced in the units. And then there's a table for them to complete each of the skills they practiced. For example, listening for gist and specific information, introducing yourself and other people. And they tick in the C column if they feel confident, and in the P column if they think they need more practice. And this you would discuss with your students to find out the results, pick up on common problems. And at the end, then, they are expected to give themselves some goals, some specific activities. And they've got to be specific. Just saying, I'm going to work harder, I'm going to read more, is not specific enough. We give them some examples. They're asked to write 3 specific actions you plan to take to improve your work. For example, I'll make time to read every day. I'll note new words in my vocabulary book. And you would expect them to keep these actions in their journal and to return to them from time to time to check that they are actually doing them. Right, so now we're going to move on to integrating technology, looking at this very important aspect. In general terms, we use technology, we recommend using technology for many activities. Speaking and listening obviously is a very good one for technology because they can record any presentations they make and go back and think about how it could be improved. They can, if they do skits or plays or discussions or surveys, interviews, then again they can record those. They can use they can use technology for their research, and it can be either language research or it can be information research. And obviously YouTube has got an enormous number of very useful things that they can watch. So we've got one of the ICT tasks is here, watch YouTube videos of well-known musicians. This is linked to a unit which is about music in the Caribbean. And note the questions asked by the interviewer. Did these questions elicit useful information? So it's quite a structured task. The first one on here is a listening and speaking task. Record your group reports on an electronic device. Use them to create a podcast. And the last one in the listening and speaking at the bottom is to work in groups to create a PowerPoint presentation about an electronic device. For example, a smartphone, a laptop computer, or a gaming console. Include the history of the device and examples of what it can do. Show your presentation to another group and ask for their feedback. The middle column shows you ideas about language or writing. So they can do some research suffixes online, create your own suffix list with words to which you can add these suffixes and use it for your own reference. And on writing, create a checklist for the features of a good formal letter. Search for samples of formal letters, both offline and online, and use your checklist to critique these samples. And finally, research. Research online to find information about new lizard species discovered on Caribbean islands. Report the findings to your class. And finally, look online to find out more about food chains. This is a unit about reading text about food chains. Create a diagram to represent a food chain and illustrate your diagram using free clip art. You'll find that each unit has at least one or probably two tasks of this sort, which it's more than just saying use the internet to find out something. There's a specific task linked to it. I think that centers students' attention, and it prevents them from just surfing the net and picking out here and there. They've got to apply what they find online. Right, moving on. Research, and this is a very important part of contemporary study in language arts. So what I'm showing you here is a research project, example of a student research project which occurs in student book 2, and this is on the social media. That the title of the project is The Effects of Social Networking on Young People, so it's very relevant. And the guidance here to take them through, they learn how to do a research outline, how to create a thesis statement, and how to create a bibliography. So in the shaded green area, that is an example of the student research project. It would be a very good student project because it covers all the bases, including the bibliography, and there was the thesis statement. The left-hand side is the continuation. You will see at the bottom you've got a bibliography, and that is using the APA format, which is recommended. And we've also got within, we've got citations, in-text citations, which you can find within the text, which we encourage students to do. And then leading off from this research project, the student research project, the example project, we ask the students to write in their writing task an expository report. And we ask them to select a topic relating to the evolution of communication and write an expository report. And they have to include in-text citations and a bibliography. So the first thing is they select the topic. It could be development of radio and television, history of the telephone, and development of electronic communications. And then they conduct the research. There's a guide to planning and a little structure to help them plan. And then so at the bottom, then some tips about writing. And we have a reflection task, as you can see, once they've completed it, which aspects of this task were difficult? What would you do differently another time? Now, the next thing, we're going to look at a few examples of different research tasks that were set for students at different levels. On this page, on the left-hand side, we have in the first book, the student book 1, we have a student survey, which is all in a unit about the media. And in this, we have the students are told how to conduct a survey and how to create questions, and they conduct the survey using the tables we provided them with, some advice about how to conduct the survey, and then finally they report their findings. They write a report on their survey. So this is using live research as a basis for a survey. The questions that are provided are: how often do you use different forms of media, and why do you use the media? The next one on the right-hand side is from student book 2, and here the students are asked to do a biography. This follows in the unit a biography of Bob Marley, So they've got an example biography, and then they're asked to, the task for them is to conduct research into a well-known personality and write a biography. Choose a personality who would serve as a good role model for young people. Could be a historical figure, a national hero, or a contemporary personality. So here we have the research stage, and they decide which sources of information to consult. Then they prepare questions to guide the research. Preparing questions is very important, and we advise using a blend of open and closed questions, such as closed questions: where was this person born? Where did he or she go to school? And an open question: what were some of the important influences in this person's life? They write the biography after their research, and we suggest an ICT task that they could record some audio material or video material about the subject of the biography, such as a news broadcast or an interview with this personality. Right, now one thing that we all get rather worried about when we're doing research is plagiarism, and how to prevent it. And we've tried to take a fun approach about this rather than have just a paragraph about plagiarism. We've done a little student discussion with the professor, and you can see the mad professor on the right hand side. And student asked, what is plagiarism? And the professor: plagiarism means using another person's ideas and claiming them as your own. So that is how the discussion goes on. And then we have examples of plagiarism. Study these examples of plagiarism, copying directly from other people's work without giving them credit for it. And that goes on. And finally, there's a task for students, which is to summarize what they learned about plagiarism from the dialogue and the information box, summarize that in not more than 100 words. So we tried to take a slight fun approach to this, but it is a very important issue. Now, this is a research project at the Student Book 3 level, so it's quite developed. We start by giving advice on questions. For research, it's important to have good questions to guide your research. And then we give another question and answer dialogue on the documentation style, APA documentation style. This is the one that's recommended, which is American Psychological Association. There are many others which you may use if you wish. And we talk about in-text citations and creating a bibliography at the end, and stress all the time how important it is for students to acknowledge information sources, particularly when they come to the school-based assessment at CSEC. So it's a good idea to get them doing this right from the start. Now, this is based on the task. You'll see the writing. It's a biography again, but this time it's on a human rights issue, because this is part of a unit on rights and responsibility with texts about Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela. So the task is to conduct research into a personality who has fought for human rights and write a biography. We have a tip: use different sources for your research. Don't rely entirely on Wikipedia. The information it includes is not always accurate, as I'm sure you are all aware. And again, we have a reflection. When the task has been completed, did the questions you formulated help you find the information you required? So we're getting the students to look at how good they're creating good questions. And again, the opportunity to what they would do differently another time. Keeping an eye on the time here. Right. I'm moving. Well, the workbooks are a new feature, so I will talk about that, and then I'll give a pause for questions. Now, the workbooks, if you've been using the Pan-Caribbean series up until now, they have been entirely redesigned. we did this first for English Matters for Jamaica. In the original edition, first edition, the workbooks were organized on a unit by unit basis. That is, they gave extra practice in the skills that were covered in the unit. But now we have changed it so it's a skill-based approach. This has obvious advantages for you as teachers, because if you find you have a going through a student book unit, you find your students need more practice, say, in using quotation marks, you can dip into the workbook and find the section on that, and you can give more work on that particular section. You'll notice that the workbook is not just about language. We have got the first section is grammar, language. Second section is on the word work, but then we also have practice and comprehension, particularly dealing with critical thinking skills, pre-reading strategies, inferring, main idea, and so on. And finally, we have a section on reinforcing and consolidating the writing skills. So, for example, if you are doing summaries and you need a bit more practice, you can dip into the workbook and find some extra work on summaries to back up what you're doing in class. So we'll just have a little look at some of the workbook pages. You'll find on the left, this is from a student book 2, you have some work on simple and continuous past tenses. And you'll notice a green arrow, which shows you a little reference, and this tells you workbook page 70. So if you want to find some extra work on the simple past tense, you can go to workbook page 70, and then on the right hand of the slide, you have got an example from the SEC workbook 2 on using the simple past tense. And it takes a slightly different tone from the student book, because we've got some fun elements in it too, like crosswords and word searches and other things of that type. Right, again, the workbook, another student book 2 exercise. On the left-hand side, we've got some work from the student book on transition words, and on the right-hand side, we've got the page in the workbook, or one of the pages in the workbook, which gives more work on transition words. And just to show you that the workbook is not entirely based on language and word work, here we have comprehension, and on the left-hand side, you have different pre-reading strategies. I'm sorry, this is all workbook page. I'm getting a bit muddled there. This is a workbook page about pre-reading strategies, and the first page is to identify types of text. The second page is all about using inference to improve comprehension. And finally, this is the type of thing you will get for writing in the workbooks. You have a point about paragraphing and some different graphic organizers on organizing your writing, paragraphing and paragraphs. Right, I'm moving on to developing skills, which is a final section of what I'm going to talk about this morning. But please do take the opportunity if you've got any questions. We haven't had any yet, apart from one. So assuming that having had no questions, we're okay to go on. I want to talk a bit about language. And I think this is an area where it's probably one of the most difficult areas that teachers have to deal with, because I had 25, 30 years in the classroom teaching. Language was one of the things I taught, and what I found, and I think you find too, is that you can get your students to do practice exercises in language. For example, using the correct verb tense or the correct verb ending, and they get it all right. And then as soon as you see them writing independently, they make mistakes. So what is going on? I think we all have difficulty. And our advice with this is to use a progression so that students don't only use the language in a kind of closed context. They move on to use it openly and more freely. And this page here, we've gone back to the first unit I showed you. This page here shows you how we use progression. We've got simple past and present perfect. We always start off with giving the information, and that's important so the students understand the concept. And then we start with fairly closed exercises. As you can see, the first exercise means that they have to use the present perfect in a sentence. They have given many of us, then there's a blank, the rainforest, and the verb in brackets, you've got never visited. So in a closed context, they have to say, many of us have never visited the rainforest. And the next exercise down the page is about present perfect and identifying when you would use it. And then going on to the next page, again, practicing the present perfect in a closed context. As you move down the page, you find the exercises give students more freedom to use it in an open context. The first exercise in the yellow shading, they have to find their own verbs to use suitably and to select the correct tense. And then finally, after that, they are using the past perfect and simple past in their own sentences. They're only given 2 verbs, and they have to, it's much more open-ended. They're using it themselves. Finally, the exercise here is to create a table of tenses with making their own notes, which again is moving towards independent use of grammar. Now, based on that, we already mentioned the workbook. So you can see how here we use the workbook to back up, give extra practice in present perfect tense. And this is 2 pages on the present perfect. The next page would be on the past perfect. So here, as you can see, it starts off with just using in a closed context, writing the correct forms of the verbs, gap filling, and then they move down to exercise 3, writing a sentence about themselves. Then we practice using for or since. Then finally, we have a nice little exercise based on a lovely poem by Grace Nichols, which you might know. It's a nonsense poem. Have you ever seen a blue tadpole? Have you ever seen a spoiled brat toad? I'm not going to read it all, but the student exercise is that they have to write their own verse or verses using have you ever with different verbs to replace the word in the words in the poem. So it's kind of fun thing to finish off with. So that's language. I'm going to move quickly now because I see time is running out. We've got about 12 minutes left. We're talking about comprehension now. And we always start comprehension with applying a pre-reading strategy to the text. We'll set some pre-reading questions and go through different pre-reading strategies with the students, such as predicting, scanning, or skimming, as you can see them here, and relevant questions. And once they've practiced all the different pre-reading techniques, we can move on to asking them to look at a text and suggest what would be the suitable pre-reading strategy to use with this text. Now, this next slide covers something very important, which you're probably familiar with is the idea of question-answer relationships. So students are aware of the type of question that is asked. Questions on every text go from explicit surface questions to implicit questions, where students have to use inference and their own thinking, critical skills to work out the answers. We start with the right there question, the literal, which you can find directly in the text. And if you glance down to the questions, when is Auntie Ellen coming to visit? And this is based on a text about 2 children and a mother. They're getting a visitor and the children are unwilling to help with the housework. That's the theme, really. And the next level of questions, which is more inferential, the answer is in the text, but you have to put together information from different parts of the text. So if we look down to 3 and 4, the questions, these are the think and search. What kind of work will both children have to do, and how does Jabari feel about this? The author and me, that's the next level of questions. You relate your own experience to the information provided in the text. So that would be question 7. What can you infer about the children's attitude to housework? You have to look at the text. It's not stated in the text, but you work it out. And then finally, there would be an on your own question using your own knowledge. It's about the text, but it doesn't refer directly to the text. Final question there is, do you think that males and females should share household tasks equally? Why and why not? I don't know, in your class is a mixed class, that could produce a bit of controversy, but there we are. And the tip there, identify the different question types in this exercise. So I think that's always a good thing to do before attempting a comprehension exercise. We cover lots of other comprehension skills. I haven't prepared slides with more, but one very important one is using context to work out the meaning of unfamiliar words. The other is identifying the main idea. So on the right-hand side, there's a short letter to the problem page, and the students are asked to find out the main idea and also to identify supporting details. You'll also find in the book other important comprehension skills like identifying fact and opinion, cause and effect, compare and contrast. Right, now on to the all-important skill of writing, and this is the last section in the presentation. We do encourage the use of the writing process, which is very important. On the left-hand side, we've got something from Student Book 1. It's based on a text about computers, and the students are asked to write a report on an invention which has changed the way we live. And they've got a planning table for the paragraphs, and then there's a simple flow chart which they can follow to take them through the stages once they've planned. And that is to write a first draft. And then if you go down the left-hand column, go round to the left, they would exchange their first draft with a partner and comment on each other's work. So peer evaluation. If they don't have the opportunity for peer evaluation, they would then check their own work for content and spelling, punctuation and grammar. Then the next stage is to revise the work and make necessary improvements before writing the revised draft and proofreading it for errors. Now, very important in the book, and this I think is very helpful, is a part of the reference section, which you'll see on the right, which is very detailed look at the writing process with the various stages down the center: pre-writing, writing a first draft, revising, editing, then publishing. And on the left-hand side, you've got some tips. For example, where can I get ideas? And memories, research, imagination, and so on. And on the right-hand side, it's what can I do? How to get the ideas. Brainstorm individually or in a group, write questions, prepare a web, visualize, plan. So that's very good to use. And right, so just take you through a few other tasks. We've got examples of different tasks, different task types. The one on the left is very early on. I think it's probably the second writing task in book 1, and the theme of the unit, the reading text, was about sports and the Olympic Games, and there was a poem about a sportsman. So this is a report about a sport. The students are asked to work in pairs to gather information. They should choose a sport which interests them, and then to find out more about it. Step 2 is to make a list of questions about what they want to know, and then step 3 is to find out, ask other people, look online or go to the library. And this really stresses the importance of gathering ideas before you write. And this is, I think it's really the most important part of the process, of the writing process, because I'm sure you have heard your students say, I don't know what to write. So this is the way to get them planning, get them thinking, working in pairs. And as I've made clear right throughout the presentation, they've had information, important information for their reports throughout the unit, which is based on the idea, in this case, on the idea of sport. And then the second stage there shows, on the left hand, shows the planning and writing stage. On the right hand side, this is a different theme. It's writing a description of place. The unit has had a description of a place the writer likes to visit and a poem about a place, and then they're given a web to help them structure their ideas. It's always a good idea to give some kind of planning tool. We give plenty of ideas for different planning tools. There is the story table, but we also get them to practice using the herringbone planner, which you'll see on the left. You're probably familiar with this, where students use the questions: what, where, when, who, why, and how, to structure their story. Or getting a bit more sophisticated, there is the pyramid plot, where they have the exposition, which starts, explains the situation, and then the events leading to the climax, the high point of the story, and then falls away, and whatever problem was in the story is resolved. And on the right-hand side, we have a planner helping them to for an argumentative composition. This is for slightly more advanced students. They produce an introduction, their thesis statement, and then 3 points. Moving down, they can oppose the points that are made and then rebuttal. You can choose these structures. There are plenty of others online. And here we go with the next one. Just very quickly through this because time is running out. Writing an expository report on the left-hand side and writing a character profile on the right. I better whiz through because I've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. Yeah, and here we have with the writing tasks, very frequently we provide a checklist for students. Of course, students can make their own checklists. For each type, checklist for revising reports, checklist for proofreading, or a checklist for stories. And these have often got another activity attached, such as reflection or a student journal. There we are. I think we're done. And so I'll just see a few questions. So we've got a question about Jamaica. I can answer that one because if you were not, you might have missed the beginning of the presentation to say that actually English Matters for Jamaica, the revised edition, which includes all the new features in this book, was published a couple of years ago. So it is available in Jamaica. I'm not sure when this one will be on the market. Wait, it is in print, isn't it? So presumably the Pan-Caribbean will be available for use from September. But everything is covered in the Jamaican book. There are some significant differences in the Jamaican book because we have followed the Jamaican syllabus closely, and we do include some Jamaican Creole texts, for example, Louise Bennett, as this is required by the syllabus, which is you won't find those in the Pan-Caribbean edition. But watching this presentation, if you are working in Jamaica, you will have had the features are pretty much the same. So I think you'll know you've had what you need to know. Is there anything else that came earlier in the chat box?
There was another question asking how people can get access to the book. So I'll just paste in the chat a link to a page on our website with all of our local booksellers by country. So if you would like to see the samples, do reach out to your local bookseller and they can help you with that. Or if you have any other questions, just get in touch with us. All of our contact details are on the screen. Or any questions after the session, do get in touch. I think there was another question about...
There was one other small question about somebody pointed out their students have trouble identifying the main idea. I think a lot of us struggle with that, but I think what you'll find is that there's a lot of work in the student books on identifying main idea, and this is where the workbook comes into its own, because we have backup exercises in the workbook that you can refer to at the time that you're doing the main idea in the student book. Any time of the workbook, if you find there's something you need to revise more deeply from the student book, you can turn to the workbook and use that.
Great. I think
1 o'clock.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone has any questions after the session, do get in touch with us. Don't worry, we're not gone forever. Thank you very much, Julia, for hosting the session today, and thank you to all of you lovely teachers for joining us too. As I said, you will be sent the recording and the slides, as well as your certificate from the session today. So if you joined later on, don't worry, you'll be sent everything. You'll have permanent access to the slides, and you've got 2 weeks to watch the recording and still receive a certificate. And after that, it will be on our YouTube channel, so you'll always have access to that, so don't worry. And you'll also be sent all of the slides and the recordings from the other sessions that we've run this week. So thank you to everyone for joining today, and for everyone who joined our other Language Lab sessions this week. Julia, is there anything you'd like to add before we close the session?
Well, just thank you very much for attending, and I do hope you're going to enjoy using the new edition. I must say I like it very much. Particularly, what I didn't mention is the new pages with the design, which is very contemporary, and I think students will relate well to that. So basically, good luck with your teaching, and I hope that this book helps you to get the best out of your students.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Julia, and thank you so much everyone for joining us. Hopefully see you very soon, and have a good day, afternoon, morning, and thank you very much, and thank you, Julia. I'll close the session now. Thanks everyone.